Hello and welcome back. I'm Babak and this is the last series of lecture on large-scale hydropower. We want to take a look to the economics of hydropower, and this is a good start to have a look to the cost of the power generation. If you look to this diagram here, so this is a factory gate equipment at the very start and the on-site equipment. So this is the equipment part of the power generation costs. And then after the equipment cost comes the project cost. And this project cost, it consists of different items such as project development cost, site preparation, grid connection, auxiliary equipment, as we discussed before, and also some non-commercial costs that are involved in construction of infrastructures. So at the end of the project cost, then it's the start of the project. And then comes the operational cost, which is the operational maintenance. And then if the project is financed by some finance administrations or banks, then it should be paid off. So this is the cost of the finance. And then the lifespan, which is also very important in economics of the projects. So these are the running costs, we could say. And from these costs, one should take a look to the levelized cost of electricity. And this levelized cost of electricity, it depends on the lifespan, on the amount of the energy produced each year, on the capacity factor of the power plant, and some other items. It's good to take a look to the different stages of a development of a large-scale hydropower plant. If you take a look to your right, then you could see the main activities. So it's the site identification, the concept study, then comes the pre-feasibility studies, feasibility studies, and then this is in fact where the financing part of the project becomes important. The project should be financed. Larger scale hydropower projects, they involve a huge cost investment. The capital cost is very huge. They could be minimum in the order of 10 millions or just go up to the hundreds millions of US dollar for each project. So at this stage, the banks or the financing institute is involved. Then the financing and then the contracts of the financing should be in place, and then starts the detailed design of the project, the construction phase of the project, and finally the commissioning phase, which is the start of the operation, and then the project could be started. As you could see, this step, it could take even several years. So on this chart here, it shows the economic principle of levelized electricity production calculations. This is the yearly cash flow. So on the early years, you have to pay money, you have to invest on the project. So that's why it's minus. And then when after several years the project starts to produce energy, then there is an income to the project which goes along the lifespan of the project. Of course, it's very simplified here, which is the income is considered to be constant, which in reality is not. It depends on the available flow, the amount of energy produced, and also the different costs of electricity in future. So this, in fact, shows a very rough cash flow of a system. And then by using the economic formulas, these monies all transfer to the point of investment decision. Because if you have $1 in your hand today, the value is much more than the $1 that you would get in 10 years from now on. So these are the economic formulas and calculations that should be considered. But all these cash flows will be transferred or could be transferred to the year of the decision, point of the investment decision. And the main challenges for large scale projects, because they involve a huge stake, the money involved is a lot, the impacts could be large, as we will see. So there are some challenges such as the poor identification and management of the environmental and social impacts, or a poor selection of a site because of the insufficient hydrological data, or some maybe unexpected adverse geological conditions when a dam is built, because the dam construction, it involves a huge amount of civil work. It really depends on the geological conditions of one site. And then the shortage of financing, the project, that time span here, it could be considered 4 years of construction, and then in many countries it ends up to maybe 10 years or 12 years of construction. Then it becomes a problematic issue with the financing scheme and the whole financial model of the project. All in all, this is let's say a big decision, not only driven by finance but also by environmental and social aspects that we will take a look to it before. I would like to highlight the capacity factor and its role. The capacity factor of a power plant is the ratio of the actual output of a power plant over a period of time to its potential output if it were possible for the plant to operate fully at the full capacity continuously over the time. So you could see here a high quality wind site has about 20 to 40% of the capacity ratio, and then the rest of the time it doesn't really produce energy as it is designed for. The solar generators there have a capacity around 25%. Nuclear power plants, and theoretically they could reach capacity factors of 90% or more, considering the nature of the production. For hydroelectricity power plant, it's really site dependence, it's site specific, it really depends on the conditions of each site. So as a designer, one has two options, in fact, for very same sites. One could consider a system which is designed for a lower capacity but a higher capacity factor, or just install the higher capacity and considering the lower capacity factor during the year. So it really depends on the decision of the designer as well. But on average, we could say, as you could see here, the span for the capacity factor for a hydropower plant is between 23 to 95%, depending on the site, of course. On average, it's 50%. So getting back to the economic of hydropower, by considering that calculations and items that we mentioned, one could reach to some numbers for levelized cost of electricity. So here you could see for large hydropower plants, the installed cost, $US per kilowatt, it could be as low as $1,050 per kilowatt, or as high as $1,600 per kilowatt. Comparing it to the small hydropower plant, you could see that the cost of the per kilowatt of a small hydropower plant is higher comparing to the large hydropower plants. The operation and maintenance costs, they are usually considered as a percentages of the yearly installed capacity. And then the capacity factor, as we discussed, you could see the variation of the capacity factor. And finally, this is the levelized cost of electricity based on the US dollar in 2010 per kilowatt hour. So you could see it's a relatively cheap comparing to the other renewable source of energy if you compare these kilowatt hour prices to those source of energies. And then there are some speculations, some studies about the future costs of the hydropower plants. I've listed the different studies here. You could see on this column. So the investment costs, you could see the ranges in different studies. And then the operational and manual costs as a percentages of the investment cost. And then the lifespan. I have to say that this 40 is maybe it's a normal, which is considered in the design, but rarely dams are built only for 40%. Most of the dams that has been built over the past decades, they are still on operation. We could find dams with more than 80 years of operation time. So the lifespan of larger scale hydropower plants is definitely more than 50 years. Of course, the turbine itself, the equipment, they should be renewed maybe after 25 years, and then it gives you the possibility for refurbishment projects to the hydropower plant. But the time life of a dam itself, it's more than 50 years. And then the levelized cost of electricity. So you could see some studies, they are going up to 11 cents per kilowatt over the future, the coming future, and then it's indicated, for example, 2030 or 2050. So if we take a look to the share of different items in the cost of a hydropower plant, this is here is an example from a 500 megawatt hydropower project in USA. So you could see that the civil works, this is for the reservoir and the tunnel work. So this is the gray area here is the power hose and the shaft itself. And then this one is the equipment, the power hose equipment, including the turbine and generator itself. So you could see that the large portion of the cost is related to the civil work for large-scale hydropower projects. This is a different when it compares to the small hydropower plants, where the equipment, the electromechanical equipment, is the largest part or the largest portion in the cost breakdown. And then, as we said, the development of the project itself, the construction phase could take several years, and that means maybe considerable percentages of the cost breakdown in the final project. If we take a look to the electromechanical equipment cost, then here it shows the different sizes in megawatts, so up to 100 megawatt and 1000 megawatt, and then this is the cost in US millions for the different projects. So you could see that there is a very good correlation between the cost and the power. It's because the electromechanical items and equipment, there are well matured techniques and developments. So there is a very strong correlation between the cost and the size of a project. Now we want to take a look to the environmental and social impacts of hydropower plant, especially with the focus on larger scale hydropower plant. Like every other water and energy management system, hydropower has positive and negative impacts on environment. We will see that it's very important how to assess and how to take the proper measures to mitigate those impacts in order to have a sustainable hydropower or a sustainable large hydropower plant. One thing that should be highlighted is that actually there is no direct connection between the size of the hydropower plant and the social and environmental impact, as I mentioned on the very first series of this lecture. It really depends on the site location, on the site specific. Hydropower is very site dependent electricity production. But we could categorize more or less in some sections, as you could see on this table. So energy and water management service here. For runoff river, it's limited flexibility and increased variability in electricity generation. But then on the main environmental and social characteristics comes the unchanged river flow when power hose is damped, or when localized further downstream reduces flow between intake and powerhouse. So you could see that this is characteristics of the runoff river, which implies this environmental impact. You could go through this table and read it fully by yourself, but it's best to, let's say, categorize the environmental impacts. A very comprehensive study is done by the International Energy Agency on the environmental and social impact of hydropower. And then 11 sensitive issues are identified, which more or less takes all the issues and discussions and debates around the social and environmental aspects of the hydropower plant. They are hydrological regimes, reservoir creation, water quality, sedimentation, biological diversity, barriers for fish migration and navigation, involuntary population displacement, affected people and vulnerable groups, public health, cultural heritage, sharing development benefits. So whatever comes into the debate for environmental and social aspects of a hydropower, it lands in one of these 11 categories. I highly recommend you to go for more information to this link, see the whole report by yourself, read through all of these items and issues, and comprehend what it means, how it really could affect the environment, and how site dependent are these issues. So all in all, it's very important for large scale projects to properly assess and then define a proper mitigatory measurements for environmental aspects. And that's the difference between the projects in many different locations of the globe. So when it comes to the environmental impacts, I would like to show you the evolution of the impact assessment or environmental impact assessments over the time. So during the 80s, it was only environmental impact assessment, and then this assessment has a management plan, which was the environmental management plan. It was more about the direct impacts and the very immediate impacts on the environment. Late 1990s comes the social impact into the consideration. So then it became the environmental impact assessment and social impact assessment. And then the resettlement action plans for those people that were previously settled into the reservoir, and then they had to be relocated out of the reservoir, because I showed you some photos of how reservoir could be filled with water, and then millions of hectares of earth could just be submerged into the reservoir. And then in 1995, the integrated environmental and social impact. So these two were in fact integrated together, and then they had some sort of integrated management plan. And then finally came these environmental impact assessments. They were also became a part to the environmental management system, the existing management system in some locations. So they were action plans and also sub-action plans for different issues that were involved in that area. So you could see how it has evolved during the last decades, the environmental and social impact assessments. And this is a point that in fact it makes it available to share the benefit of larger scale hydropower plants for a broader range of people and make it a more sustainable option. So into the heart of every debate, one should take a look to those steps that were taken in that specific project, and if there had been any proper mitigation measurements for that project. So all in all, we can wrap it up here that emphasizing transparency and an open participatory decision-making process is very important, and then it's also creates a more environmental friendly and sustainable solution. In particular, the planning of large hydropower development mandates guidelines and regulations to ensure the impacts are assessed. This is, I would like to point here, when it comes to the investments of few $1 million, large impacts on the region, then there are many regulatory mandates at the national levels, at the countries that the project is located, that should be followed. So there are very strict rules and regulations to follow in order to make a proper assessment. This is enforced not only by the governments, but also by the financing parties that are going to finance the project, like World Bank in many developing countries that are investing money in big projects, and then it's the financing body that enforces the very safeguarding regulations that should be followed, should be taken into consideration in the design of the project. So it's very, again, not site dependent, but we could say country dependent and financing dependent. But all in all, as a designer or as engineers, we should always take a close look to the environmental impact assessments, social impact assessments, and see if all the guidelines were followed properly in a project. I would like to wrap up this session by showing some photos from some Swedish experiences in hydropower, how to deal with environmental impacts. So here you could see this is a dam, relatively a small reservoir here, and how the embankment is actually landscaped and surface is stripped after the excavation in order to combine the created reservoir into the nature without observing the excavations that has been done here before. So here, for example, you could see the riprap on this side, and then how it is integrated with the surrounding, and then recreational facilities that are built on the lake in order to make it possible for local people to come and enjoy the created reservoir at this hydropower project. So this is exactly it shows the same reservoir of this power plant on the picture on the top. And then this one here shows the fish plants at near a power station. So building a power station here, providing the facilities for the fish to travel, to migrate along the river, but at the same time making a fishery plants in order to release fish into the river. So this is the fish ladder. So this fish ladder enables fish to migrate over the dam from one side of the dam to the other side through these fish ladders. So in order to minimize the impact on the ecosystem of the river. So these type of measures could be taken for any project. It really depends on the proper assessment and proper mitigation measures on that project. I would like to end up this lecture series here. We try to have a general look to the larger scale hydropower plant. In fact, the hydropower by itself deserves to have a full course or even a full program dedicated just to the hydropower. We have full courses for hydropower at KTH and in many other universities in Sweden. That if you are interested, you could participate in this one. But what I tried here is just to give a glimpse of the to the hydropower in general, with a focus on larger scale projects. We will try to develop this understanding through the exercise session. We will go through some step-by-step calculations for larger scale power, taking a closer look to the theory behind the hydropower. And until that time, have a nice day.